Hey there, Reylo fam. This is Jungle Jenna, and in this podcast, a lovely lady named Leslie, aka Angelic Hellraiser, will be joining me for parts 1, 2, and 3. So I wanted to give a shout out to her before jumping into the podcast and give her a thank you for contributing to the Reylo discussion. And also, I wanted to highlight her fabulous artwork that will be showcased throughout the next 3 episodes of this podcast. So I'm really looking forward to the Star Wars trailer coming out hopefully this month. So I'll do a trailer reaction when that does end up releasing. So I hope that you enjoy the podcast and feel free to comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Oh, obviously we love Reylo. That's
Hmm.
we're both Reylo shippers. So
Definitely.
fangirling over Reylo is not a hard thing to do at all.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
It might come as a surprise. I wanted to broach this. I did not like the movie or Kylo Ren in the beginning, and I know that's probably gonna sound surprising because I was not a fan of the prequels, and I had heard nothing about the new movie. And a family friend of mine, she was very lonely, and she said, "Let's go watch the movie." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going because I want to see the movie. I'm going for you, so okay." And it starts out, and Kylo Ren is introduced. And I was like, "Hey, this is interesting. He's okay. It's a good beginning." And then I see Rey, and I did not think she was a Skywalker in the beginning because I had no idea. So I was introduced to her, and I was like, "Oh, okay, she's just someone new. That's fresh. I like that." But then, because I wasn't paying attention to the movie and its subtext, I began to fall into the misdirections, the red herrings that they were using, like the Finn and Rey and the Rey Skywalker thing. And I fell victim to it, and I got really irritated about midway through because I was subconsciously sensing the Reylo subtext. And I've always been a fan of villain hero relationships, whether they're romantic or otherwise. I love their dynamics. So I was constantly becoming more irritated with the movie because I did see all these tiny little things between Raylo. And yet I just, because I had the bias in front of me, shielding me from seeing any of the rest of it. And for months afterward, it kept coming to the back of my mind. There's something more to Kylo Ren. You weren't looking hard enough, because I didn't like his character at first. And I kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And finally, my curiosity and at the back of my mind, all that tiny little subtext that I had subconsciously picked up on began to boil to the front. And I started to do a little research in the Tumblr tag. Of course, there was a lot of anti stuff, but I ignored that. And I saw a bunch of art, and I saw all these meta posts, and I was thinking to myself, you know what? You really were not paying attention to the movie. You need to go back and watch it again. And boy, was I not paying attention. It, the way they introduced Kylo Ren has become my favorite, along with Finn. They're my two favorites. And the way they introduced Kylo was really unique. He was introduced at a point in his timeline or his story arc where it was just so pivotal, because he went from this stagnant point, we don't know what happened behind him, and then he has them ordered to be killed, the villagers, and then he lets Finn go, which is a choice of Ben's, not Kylo Ren's. And then later on in the movie, he kills Han Solo, which was not surprising to me personally, because there was not enough of a connection with them. They shared blood, but Han was never there, and I even picked up on that in the movie in the first viewing. And so that did not come as a surprise to me. But directly after that, you see a change in his character when Rey takes the lightsaber. Everything about him suddenly shifts, and he's calm, and he doesn't really want to fight her. And you can see it in the way he keeps striking at her saber. And I noticed, I think her name is Cobb Webbing, I think, in
Yeah.
Tumblr. She pointed this out too. Yeah, she pointed it out. I was like, you're right. He keeps striking at striking at her. And then the point when they're joined, because it was a definite force bond. I didn't know what it was in the beginning when I was watching it in the movie, but I even noticed it in the movie. I was like, they're sharing something. That's really weird if she's supposed to be a Skywalker, because that was a lot of sexual subtext. I mean, it was there. It was...
Oh yeah.
And, oh yeah. And what I noticed, and I was thinking about it the other day, and it was actually really beautiful. I hadn't picked up on it as deeply as I did when I was thinking about it, but Ben Solo, when he said, "You need a teacher," it was desperate and sudden. It was like he was trying to get her attention and say, "Just hear me out. Just hear me out. Just for a minute." And then he says, "I can teach you the ways of the Force." That's also, you know, "I can teach you the ways of the world," you know, and all that. But what he was also saying is, "Trust me for just a second. Just a second, trust me, and I'll show you something." And he does. He willingly shows her. He opens up this time. Instead of in the interrogation, he didn't realize that she saw that in him, and she saw the deepest thing in him that no one else had seen, that he didn't share with anybody else, not his mother, I'm assuming, not Luke, none of them knew that about him, and she figured it out, boom, that fast. And so, of course, it shocked him, but then, in that particular moment in the saber duel, he willingly lets her in. And she willingly lets him in, because whenever he says, "I can show you the ways of the Force," she says, "the Force," and it clicks in her head. And I know for a fact the character's thinking back to the interrogation room, what we did in the interrogation room, and both of them willingly initiate that Force bond, consummating it completely, because this time they were both willing.
Oh
and
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just gonna tell you that just like gives me chills. Like, really, I have chills right now. I have goosebumps because I have thought of it like, because for me, I picked up on the subtext pretty heavily, like in the bridal carry and during the interrogation scene. And I picked up on it a tiny bit in the lightsaber duel, but it actually took me a while to fully recognize the subtext in the lightsaber duel, and especially when they're on the cliffside. But, you know, I remember I was watching the Star Wars Connection podcast, and they talked about that being the consummation of the Force, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I get it now. I see the subtext. But the way that you explained that with how Kylo Ren willingly lets her in, and Rey willingly channels the Force through him, or they're sort of finding that together. I've never thought of it that way before, and oh my gosh, like seriously, it gave me chills. That is so awesome.
I know. I was thinking about it the other day, and it hit me like a runaway freight train. I was like, oh man, they're definitely having a romance. Whether it's going to be obvious, I think it's going to be slow burn, but it's definitely there, because you also see the way Kylo Ren looks at her afterward, because after she channels it, I think she also pulls in a little bit of his rage, and I don't think that was deliberate. I think it's just they were in the moment. It's kind of like whenever you're being intimate with somebody, you're in the moment, you get a little rough, you know, it happens.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I completely
and he's trying
agree.
to deflect her, and he's thinking, oh crap, you know, she's like really intense. The thing with getting back to the part when the ground splits, it of course was extremely symbolic, and you saw the heart shape where Kylo was in one side of the heart. I mean, that one was so obvious. I showed it to my friend. She wasn't exactly sure. She thought it was going to be Rey Skywalker, and she's like, I don't know, man. And she wasn't really familiar with it, and then I showed her that, and she was like, oh, yeah.
Well, that's awesome that your friend like recognized that and stuff. And is this the same friend that you went to see The Force Awakens with for the first time?
No, actually, that was my aunt. I love her to death, but I think her mind's going a little bit, because she couldn't really keep up with the storyline, and she was really shocked when Han was killed, and I had to explain it to her, even though, like I said, I wasn't really paying attention. No, I have two friends, actually, who are into Reylo, and I've talked to them both. One of them, the first time I mentioned it, I told her, I said, I'm Reylo trash. And she's like, wait a minute, Reylo, what is that? I said, Star Wars. And she's like, oh, wait, is that Kylo Ren and Rey? And I said, yeah. And she's like, oh, man, totally. I can see it. And I was just like, this is why we're such good friends.
Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. Yeah, I don't really know anyone in real, kind of in my real life who
Mm-hmm.
ships Reylo. I remember there was one time I met someone and we were both nerding out just about things in general,
Mm-hmm.
and we started talking about Star Wars, and I told her, because she said that she didn't like Kylo Ren, and I said, well, I'm a big fan of Kylo Ren, and I knew in that moment that she knew that I was a Reylo shipper, and then we talked about it
Yeah.
afterwards. She's like, you're a Reylo shipper, aren't you? And I was like, yes, I am. I'm total Reylo trash, and she's like, I knew it the minute that you said that you were a Kylo Ren fan. And then we actually had a moment to talk about it, because she actually wasn't, like, she wasn't an anti,
Mm-hmm.
but she thought that the whole Reylo thing was completely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And and so we started kind of talking about it, and I was giving her so I was explaining, because I feel like there's a huge disconnect between
Yes.
people like
Yes.
outside of the Raylo community, and not not even when you're talking about antis, but if you're just talking about kind of like casual Star Wars fans, or people who don't really, like, they're not against Raylo, but they just don't know much about it. They
Right.
are completely misunderstood on why Raylo shippers are so drawn to this relationship. So I kind of had the opportunity to talk to her about it, and so she went away from the conversation with, she wasn't a Raylo shipper, but she, kind of got some
She
insight.
appreciated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
appreciated it a little bit more, so that was good.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some misunderstanding with Kylo Ren's character, that he's so loyal to Snoke, and that he's so kind of blinded by this faith in Snoke as this leader or kind of false father figure or whatever. And I think it's true that there's a part of Kylo Ren, and especially maybe more so in the past, that has really sought that validation and approval from Snoke. But what's interesting about Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens is that I feel like we're seeing him at this transition point where he's having
Yes.
serious doubts about Snoke in the First Order, and I personally don't see much evidence of him showing or demonstrating absolute loyalty towards Snoke. I actually feel like the loyalty he shows is more towards both Darth Vader and Rey than he shows. I actually feel like he acts against Snoke, or defies his orders, or does the opposite of Snoke would expect Kylo Ren to do all throughout The Force Awakens.
Yes. Yes. And you hit a crucial point because if you look at the way that I've been looking at it over and over again, and I don't think it's because I'm wearing my Raylo glasses. I was looking at it from, okay, this is just this movie right here. I'm not going to pay attention to past. I'm not going to pay attention to what's going to happen in The Last Jedi. But the way they set this up, there is some kind of connection he has to Rey, and his loyalty to because also someone else pointed this out in the database. It talks whenever it's showing the Vader mask. It talks about Kylo Ren wanting to fulfill his destiny, and then at the saber duel, that picture, it talks about how Kylo Ren senses that Rey's and his destiny are both intertwined. So his whole perception of everything now includes Rey.
It,
No matter what, he's like, okay, Rey's in here. Somehow we're connected, and I think that he's somehow known about her for a while. I don't know if it's through dreams or visions or hearing her voice, because you even commented on it. I saw a post you made about his weird little reaction the first time he hears her voice without the mask, and it's such a curious
I
reaction.
know, it's such a curious reaction, right? It's like he has a physical response to hearing her voice. It's that, yeah, it took me a while to notice that. I remember that I was watching the interrogation scene it was on YouTube, and I was sitting at my laptop, and it was right after the DVD Blu-ray thing first came out. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had like a much better, like the HD version of the interrogation scene, and I was watching
Mm-hmm.
it, and I remember noticing when he did that, like when he had that physical response to hearing Ray's voice for the first time, and I was like, did I see that correctly? So I went back and I was
Mm-hmm.
watching it, and I kind of had it in slow-mo, and I was like, yeah, he for sure is because I remember even the first time I saw The Force Awakens, I noticed him, like it's when you're kind of just looking at it without really searching for, if you're just looking at it sort of casually, it looks like
Mhm.
he does, like his head twitches or something.
Mhm.
But then if you're actually paying attention to what he's doing, it's like, um, I guess this is maybe, maybe I'm looking at it more through Reylo colored glasses, but when she first, sort of my interpretation of that scene now, when she first wakes up and, because in the forest, she doesn't speak, so he never hears her voice. But then in the
Right.
interrogation scene, she wakes up and she says, "Where are the others?" And he pauses for a moment before he responds, and part of me thinks, because that's like the first time that he's ever heard her voice. So part of
Mhm.
me thinks that, obviously he removes his mask because he knew that it was making her uncomfortable, or that it was influencing her perception of him in a negative way. And he wanted her to
Mhm.
see him as a man. So he takes off his
Mhm.
mask, but he also, I think, was wanting to hear her voice as Ben Solo and not as Kylo Ren, through, kind of through the obstruction of his mask. And so when he hears her voice, I don't know if it's because he recognizes her from a Force vision, or I don't know, maybe he just thinks her voice sounds really nice or something, but he, like, as she's launching into this explanation of BB-8 and kind of all of the mechanics, I felt like his response was truly a man's response. He's only like half paying attention to what she's saying while he's like having this, he's like off in La La Land, like on cloud nine, and he's like scoping out her body, and I was like, that is a total man.
That definitely is one thing I noticed, because whenever he has the physical reaction, and it does, it looks like what you would get when you get this weird little tingle that goes down your back. You're like, ooh, and it did. That's what it reminded me of. And then I see his eyes. He looks from her face, drags his eyes down to her feet, deliberately drags his eyes back up to her face, and then looks away, and it's like he just kind of pulls himself back into, okay, she's, we got to get back to the map. And then it's just this back and forth. And honestly, to me, it seemed like Ben Solo was having trouble concentrating on what he was supposed to concentrate on, because whenever he gets close to her and he starts looking into her, yeah, she's crying and everything. And I know people, they talk about, oh, that's abuse. Me personally, because I'm a tomboy, and you're not going to put me into any position that I don't want to be in. And that's the way I see Rey. She's a tough girl. She can handle it. And besides, he was being gentle with her compared to everyone else. And he was even playing coy with her the whole time. And the "you're my guest" line, a lot of people, that reminds them of Beauty and the Beast. It actually reminded me of a specific scene in Troy with, I think, Brad Pitt
Yeah,
and his
yeah.
love of Briseis. Yes, it reminded me of that. And it was that whole playful thing that he had going on. And then um, when he's peering into her mind, you can tell that he keeps getting pulled closer to you. You notice he just keeps leaning closer and closer. And then when he sees Han is when it kind of breaks. But when he talks about the island, which is extremely symbolic, because now they're going to possibly be on an island together, and I find it funny he was grinning about or smiling, I should say, about the island. It's only whenever he talks about Han and he warns her about him, and she says, "Get out of my head." He puts himself back into a very dominant position, though he's not being, towering over her or really gloating. He just puts himself back into a distant position, and he's like, "Okay, I know you've seen the map. Like, snap back into it, Ben. This is what you're after. You're not toying with her. You're supposed to be after the map." And you can see the transition. You can see him, how he's, and then he falls right back into just, "Don't be afraid, I feel it too." And it's like he's going back and forth between, "I'm supposed to be after the map, that's what I'm after," because you could see his face, even like his lips trembling when he's like, "Give it here." And she,
Yeah.
they're like kids.
Oh my gosh, it is like tug of war between them in the interrogation scene.
Yes.
And I think that you make a
Yes.
really good point about Kylo Ren, And I remember even reading a Tumblr post about this a while ago, and it kind of talked about the persona of Kylo Ren, but then the true person of Ben Solo, and how
Mm-hmm.
Kylo Ren is kind of going back and forth between these two all the time. But what I like about the interrogation scene is that it really shows that his true person is Ben Solo, and that
Yes.
Kylo Ren is this guise that he uses as a way to intimidate and to maintain control of situations. But in this moment with Rey, he's finding it really hard to maintain control and to stay focused on what he needs to accomplish. And I think sometimes where I feel like the disconnect is between Reylo shippers and antis is that when I think the I remember the first time that I watched the interrogation scene, I was more overwhelmed by just how close he was to her and thinking like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, they're almost touching. What are they going to do? Like kiss or something? Like, well, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what the makers are expecting me to I don't know what they want me to think about this, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
I liked as he was reading her thoughts, because I felt like up until that point, Rey was just presented as this super strong, fearless character, but then as he's reading her thoughts, you see her vulnerability, but you don't see it in a bad way. I think that you just see that. I don't know. I almost felt like there was a beauty about. There was almost something beautiful about the way that he was reading her thoughts, because it was almost like as he's looking at her, I feel like he's looking at her as the images from her head are filling him, but the way he's looking at her, it's almost like he's seeing her for who she really is. She's not seeing
Yes.
like this guise of, because I think even for Rey, like she is tough and fearless, but for her that can also, like,
She's still human.
yeah,
She's human.
yeah, yeah, exactly. She's still human, and like with Kylo Ren, or like with Ben Solo, and Kylo Ren being his guise, or the front that he puts out to make other people think that he's so tough and fearless. I think Rey also has her own persona of fearlessness that she puts out to hide the fact that she really feels pretty lost and vulnerable and is craving that belonging. And so when I think he sees that in her, he's seeing the real Rey. He's seeing the human Rey,
Yes.
and not
Yes.
the guys maybe that other people could be fooled by.
Yeah, and that right there for me is exactly what the interrogation was about. I think that's what the writers were going toward, because she also finds the human part of Ben. She tells him basically, you're afraid that you will never be as strong as Darth Vader. She does not use the word power, she uses strength. And strength is a morally gray kind of word or description, because strength can be strength in faith or strength in power, and it can go either way, positive or negative. And that was an interesting word choice, but when she did that, it was like Ben was totally naked in front of her now, and he was already kind of disrobing a little bit while he was looking through her thoughts, and he really, in my opinion, was becoming endeared to her because he found similarities in her, though they were still mirrored in an opposite way compared to him. She didn't have a lot. He had a family and everything, and that also comes to her reaction to him killing Han. I personally see her character as looking at him. At first, she didn't think he was going to do it. And then, whenever he does, it had to go through her head. She was thinking, you had all of this. You had family. You had a home. You had all of this. And how could you do that? And then they shared that moment in the saber duel. No telling what she downloaded, because he fully opened to her that time. And you notice how after that scene, everything was quiet. They didn't comment on it anymore in the movie. There was no other subject matter on it at all. And so you have no idea what they shared.
That's
Nothing. I
true.
mean, it could be nothing or it could be everything.
Well, and what's interesting is that Pablo Hidalgo via
Mm-hmm.
Twitter said that she had downloaded more than just the fact that, like, she had seen more in his head than just what the fact that he wanted to be as strong as Darth Vader. And so I'm interested to see if in The Last Jedi they're going to explore what else they ended up sharing during that moment on the cliffside.
There's so much symbolism with islands in different movies, but for her, she lives on a desert planet. There's no water really, and she, in her mind, imagines an island surrounded by water. So it's her utopia, if you will.
Yeah.
And so in that, he sees this is her ultimate peace. And for him to slightly smile at it, and I mean, he is totally checking out her features the entire time he's doing it. So all that subtext is there. Like he's just studying her. Like there's just, to me, there's no animosity. He's just watching her, absorbing her, looking at her, and just kind of experiencing her. And even though it's basically, she's just like, that's none of your business, that's my personal stuff, get out of my head. Well, then she turns the tables, and that's why I look at the scene and I'm like, well, she just totally voided anything he did to her, because he found that her euphoria place, she found his ultimate fear. So
yeah.
I just
Yeah, exactly. But they're almost in two completely different places in their journey with each other, because her perception of him, I don't think that she's resolute in her hatred of him. I have a feeling like she doesn't completely know what to make of him. She senses this connection with him. She was taken off guard when he removed his mask, and she saw that he was completely different from what she was expecting. I think that she has a glimpse into his vulnerability, conflict, and pain. So she has information about him that kind of unnerves her, because she's not able to have like this absolute kind of this absolute picture of him as being someone totally evil and irredeemable. But I do think that she's temporarily, I think that her loathing, or her apparent loathing of him, does seem to be resolute for the time being, just because of what happened with Han, and then also because he attacked Finn. And so, but it's going to be interesting to see, like, so I think that Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, and possibly in Episode 9, he's going to be more of the pursuer, because he seems to be much more open to this connection, whereas Rey almost is much more skeptical, or probably will be skeptical, and he'll have to, like, kind of gradually earn her trust. So I agree that their romance will probably be more of a slow burn, which I think will actually be much more satisfying than if they had a really quick romance.
Oh yes, absolutely. And the thing with the feelings of Rey toward Kylo, I think she is conflicted, because we don't know everything she downloaded from him. And whenever she witnessed his ultimate fear, the deepest seeds of his fear, that is really earth-shattering, actually, because she looked at him as this warlord, and then all of a sudden she's slammed in the face. And it's by her own doing, because they both start experiencing it together, and you could see it on Kylo's face. He's like, what is this exactly? Like, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah. And he's like, I kind of like it.
And you can see on her face, whenever she discovers his ultimate fear, he looks terrified, but she just has this look like, did that really just happen? And whoa, that was the most intense, powerful feeling I've ever felt before. And then that can also be brought in with the lightsaber duel at the very end, because whenever the ground splits and she's looking at him, of course, he's looking at her with kind of a loss. I mean, he's guarded, of course. He's like, I didn't want things to go down that way, but okay.
Yeah.
And she looks, she has this, oh my God, did I just do that kind of look on her face. And then it's almost, to me personally, now this is just the way I looked at it, it's almost like she wanted to say, if she were standing in front of him and if it were for comedic relief, she'd be like, oh crap, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Almost like, I don't know what came over me. Yeah.
Yes. And whenever they were linked, I think that's what happened, because of course it wasn't very smart on Ben's part, if you actually think about it, to link with her that way, because his emotions were so screwed up and so were hers, and she's already going through so much. She's gone from living a constant, every day the same, and I know exactly how that feels. I've been having to live that way for years. So if I'm suddenly jolted into a new environment, even though I am a very willful person, and she is too, she's very strong, it still messes with you mentally and emotionally. So him opening himself up to her at that particular moment actually wasn't smart, because her emotions are volatile, his emotions are volatile. His, of course, he's more focused on the dark side and he has a better feel for it than she does, but she kind of leans toward it too a little bit. And you could tell that she liked the feeling of overpowering him. You could see it in her face as she was prowling around him like a predator. You just, and you saw the way he was just like, wait a minute, stop, you know. So
Yeah.
what he does changes both of them, because he chooses this time to open himself completely to her, and then she lets it in. And I think J.J. Abrams even said something about the scene that way, that she just kind of lets it in. Well, what she did is she allowed a little bit of trust, just like he did. So that's something they cannot erase. They just trusted each other and shared a force bond and consummated it in that moment. That is huge, and people have missed it, and I missed it at first. But all the sexual subtext and all that aside, they just created a bond on trust without even really realizing it. And the thing about it is, every character and every story and every person in real life, their root of what they want is to be understood. Belonging, family, all of that comes afterwards. All Ben wants is to be understood. No one understands him, especially not Snoke. But Snoke likes to play like he does, but he doesn't. And Han really didn't. And that's why whenever he went up to Ben and he says, come home, we miss you, and the look on Ben's face, I immediately thought, in the first viewing of it, I was like, and it took you this long to show up? This long to show up? I mean, Ben needs to just slap him, because that is, you were already saying that he's gone, and then you come up there and you put him into a very difficult position where he has to make a choice. He made the wrong one, however, but you're his father and you weren't there when he needed you the most. No telling how many times he needed you and you weren't there. We don't know any of that. And from the way Ben acts, it's easy to deduce that that's what it was. He was an absentee father. And then Leia had her own problems. And of course, I don't think she really understood Ben either. And Luke, we have no idea what Luke was doing. So maybe there's a chance that no one really got Ben. No one was there to say, hey, I get it. Or even to listen to him, or he didn't trust anyone enough to listen to him. And then he gives it to a girl he barely knows, but they share the son connection where she immediately points out his ultimate weakness. I mean, that had to shake him to the core. And it had to make him think for a second, whoa, no one's ever done that before. And then, of course, Snoke's and Hux's comments makes him even more. I mean, his whole tantrum afterward, actually one of my favorite scenes in the movie, because the stormtroopers are hilarious.
Oh my gosh, I love that scene so much. And I think that scene's so interesting where he has the tantrum right afterwards, because I think sometimes it's just interpreted as, oh, you know, Kylo Ren's just having another one of his tantrums or episodes or whatever. But I think that in that moment, not only is he feeling like, I think he's really feeling the pressure from Snoke and from General Hux. He feels like he's being watched at that point, and that he has to but I think he feels like he has to perform now in order to maintain that trust, or to keep those relationships intact within the First Order. And so when he just over the course of The Force Awakens, you know, he's already decided to let Finn go, and then Finn goes renegade. You know, he's on the loose with one of the TIE fighters with Poe, the prisoner that he was supposed to be getting information about BB-8 from, and then so he kind of just continues to make all of these mistakes, and it's just one thing after another, and then he's not able to, he takes Rey instead of the droid, and so he's in trouble for that, and then he gets in trouble for not being able to get the map from her mind, and then he goes to the cell and she's gone. And I think Kylo Ren at that point was just like, you know what, fuck this day.
Like, man, I've just been having a bad work day.
Yeah, yeah.
One of those terrible days at the office, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think at that point, like, he just, like, was, I think in
But
his
yeah,
effort to
you make a
gain
good
control, he
point.
was losing control. Or